want to talk a little bit about stylization, and I'm just using the same thing you guys are, just some photos from offline. And this guy in particular, I just like this sort of blocky shape, the sort of receding mouth under his nose, and the way his chin, there's just a nice little shape language there. So that's the reason I picked this one. And if I pull that out, that's kind of, in a really basic way, this is sort of my starting point. Start emphasizing a little bit the ball in the end of his nose, his sunglasses. And then I like the way his mouth kind of is pulled back a little bit back here. And I'm not doing these. This isn't a caricature. I'm using these as just sort of jumping off points for myself. And I like this angle also on the front of his face where he gets sort of this, I don't know, in my head it's like an arrow. I just like that. I mean, that's what I'm looking for, is these abstract things that just give me really interesting shape language. So I'm just going to get started on this because I'll probably do a couple of variations on this. And I'm kind of starting with his hat. Normally I'll throw down the whole shape overall, but in this case I just sort of started with his hat and then started building the front of his face. And when I'm first starting doing these things, a lot of them are just exploratory and I'm just trying to find shapes, and a lot of them fail. And in class, I'm always talking about spatial relationships. So the way I'm kind of building this right now is I put that bill of his hat shape down, and then I sort of know where everything falls in relation to that, and where the nose falls in relation to the glasses shapes. I think when you're first starting this, it's not the best way to work. I think it's better to get the whole thing locked in. And then I like to flip them to see if they're early on, to see if they're balanced. If I'm out and about with my sketchbook and I'm not sure, I'll go into the bathroom and look at it in the mirror. And that mouth shape here, I think, is important, and because it's going to sort of launch his chin out forward. And it's not quite right there yet. And again, we're not doing a caricature. I'm using this as just jumping off points for shapes. And that's his launch pad for his chin, which can, if you push that chin out more, it sort of pushes the mouth back more. It's just a kind of a contrast thing. And also, if you notice here, everything is, I'm just mapping things right now. I'm trying to keep it loose, but I'm just mapping things out. I'm not really jumping in any sort of detail or anything like that. And also, I'm pushing them here, but my hands aren't all that warmed up yet. So, and we'll do one or two other variations on this where we'll push them a little harder. But I'm pushing them, but I'm in this point, I'm sort of feeling the whole thing out a little bit. And flipping it again, because I get this much down, I want to make sure that it's working. Sometimes you flip this and it's so off balance, it's sometimes just not worth pursuing. Or, I can flip it and work on it backwards. Knocking the color in now helps because it's pushing up against his hair and it's sort of ending the head shape, where before it can start to feel like it's floating, and it gives a nice graphic shape. I'm putting a little tone on the nose. I like to put a little bit of that, imply that little reddishness on the nose, and then I also can erase out a little highlight out of it. And I need a little bit of a dark value in the mouth to sort of separate it. I build these things up. To me, a drawing is a building. So keeping everything fairly light. And then even with a computer, I don't really like to erase a lot. It can start to disconnect your whole drawing. And you lose a lot of the flow with it. And if I was just doing this at a coffee shop or something, this might be a, I don't know, 5-minute drawing maybe. Sometimes less. When you're going through it and kind of speaking of what you're talking about, you tend to slow down a little bit. With things like hair, I want to look at how it flows. Like from a, it's sort of a plane, and they're all sort of flowing in a different way. So I always want to make sure I get that kind of blocked in. He's got a really clear hair language, the way it's flowing across his head. So it's actually making it really easy for me as a, to interpret that as a graphic shape. I'm just going to add a little pattern here onto his shirt. He has a plaid shirt on, and that's a pretty easy pattern to add in. And also, I'm not following all that shadow stuff on his face. I'm going to kind of reinterpret it a little bit. I'll probably darken the top of his head a little bit where that bill comes out, because then I can sort of get a dark shape that kind of unifies everything towards the top of his head. And this stubble idea on his chin, notice it's exaggerated. I mean, if I did that subtly, you're not even going to see it. And in this case, we want to start pushing all our shapes. It could be bigger, whatever it is, but we want to push those shapes. We want to make sure that we have readability. And I'm just now starting to go in and sort of darken my lines. And I'm thinking my light source is up to the left. And so everything kind of away from that can get a little darker. And then, that's just a rule of thumb. I might also use that to separate things like the bottom of the bill of his hat. I mean, that is away from the light, but I'll heavy that up because it'll pull it forward away from his face a little bit. And now we're starting to get a little bit of value in here, and you can see how much that helps. Just a punch of some value just helps a lot. So we're always looking for those places where you can unify things and mass them together with value. And now I'm kind of confident up with my shapes where I can start punching my line because I feel like the shapes are working okay. So now it's to start to build that value, build my line quality, and start to separate things and make sure it reads really well. And now that I say that, flip it again, take a look at it. And now I'm going to really start hitting some of these lines and really punching them because it's kind of in the home stretch. Okay, so let's put him over here and let's do a different variation on that where we just sort of jump off on what the shape language I just sort of learned is. Now I'm pushing his chin out a lot further than I did before and pushing it a lot harder. I also shoved his nose up a little tighter and did a different variation on his eyes because originally I was thinking I wouldn't put his sunglasses on, but I might. And if you notice now, he's a little more geometric and a little more shapy and less out of the realm of realism. And again, just mapping, like just trying to find these shapes. He looks a little angrier now. And I just go with it. Like I sort of get some ideas about the shape language and then I just sort of go with it. And then they start telling me who they are in my head. And it sort of starts a narrative in my head. And giving him a little more of a trucker hat. That way I can block it out black and white. And it just gives me another variation. I'm going to sharpen up this chin and pull it out a little bit and then narrow it up like that. And it just gives him a little more severity. And I don't know, I guess I'm kind of running with the thing. He looks a little angry. Yeah, I'm going to come down here and emphasize that jowliness too under his, at the corners of his mouth. That'll age him up a little bit also. And make sure whether it's a sketchbook or digital, whatever, make sure you're turning it so you get the best angles to get, when you need to get some nice clean lines or ellipses or anything like that. want to flip him here again. And maybe work on him a little bit this way, make sure he's balanced. If you keep flipping him back and forth, you'll usually end up with a pretty balanced drawing because you're fixing the things that you see when you flip it. So I'm going to give him a little bit of a value, so a little bit of a 3-day beard kind of thing. But I'm going to smudge this out so it's subtle. Now it's the same thing I might do with a pencil. I just smudge an area out. Or if I have a water-soluble pen, I'll hit it with a little water brush and bleed it out. Just give him that kind of 3-day beard thing. Now at this point, it's basically just punching lines, value, things like that. So that's just a second variation. So there's our second variation. And let's just do one more, maybe jump off the cliff a little more now. And you're going to notice here too that they're going to get more and more kind of simplified as I go. The more warmed up I get, the more simplified they get. It's actually harder to get to simplicity than complexity in a weird way. And if you notice, I'm changing his hat shape up a little bit. So I'm not sure. It feels a little bit like a old cop hat or something. And if you notice, we're still using this same shape language, this big jutting jaw thing. I'm just making them look, well, as of right now, sort of a little bit cop. Now I'm going to give him a mustache, maybe a beard. So maybe a little more of a mutton chop idea, which is going to push him a little more into sea captain territory. So maybe I'll just run with that. I'm just going to build a little more of this beard idea, the mutton chop beard idea. And now he's looking a little more sinister. And if you notice too, the eyebrow has become the bill of the hat. So the eye is just being built right out of the bill of the hat, sort of using it like a brow line. And I'm just going to come here with my eraser and sort of just pull out some sort of insignia, indication, and that kind of thing. And you can see how that collar just gives it a nice graphic shape. And it also gives it a little bit, in this case, it's giving him a little bit of posture, like an indication of posture, because that thing's right up against it. It feels very formal. And that gives us our third variation. So let's try one more from one other photograph. So this one, we'll just do a quick variation of one. My hand's a little bit starting to get warmed up here, so I should be able to do this one a little quicker. And she had an interesting nose shape that just popped out at me, but kind of her whole shape language is really evident, like her hair shape, her nose shape, her overall face shape. And then I also noticed that from her nose to her mouth, that distance feels longer than normal, which it probably isn't, but I just run with it. That's just how I'm reading it. I'm going to drop this mouth shape down pretty far. Push the distance from the nose to the top lip. Just like, again, it's just what it feels like to me. And she's got around her mouth, she's got this sort of jowly thing going on. And the interesting thing about this website is they're taken in like horrible lighting. It's just blasted out sunlight. So it actually reveals a lot of interesting shapes and things like that. But sometimes you have to kind of discard the shadow information, just kind of make up your own. Because I think they could get too complicated if you started chasing all that shadow information. And I'm going to add some of that value to the nose again. Again, I'm just looking for places where I can add some value. You can see even that subtle stuff like that, it makes a big difference. Once you mass in that whole hair shape, then you can drop in some of these individual hairs kind of hanging down into her face and things like that. If you do it too soon, it's going to look like spaghetti hair. Hair is actually like one massed unit, so you got to kind of treat it that way. So that's our second one, or our second take on a different picture. And you can see up here, this is just what we based it on. It's just this kind of simple, sort of a rectangle. And then you could even think of the hair as kind of a triangle, one overall unit. And then just placing the features and pushing and pulling, which is kind of what I want you guys to do. The next, I'll put up another one of these pretty quick about doing the whole body and all that kind of stuff too.